Hello and welcome to this experimenting with paint workshop with me, Lucy Hill, and the Ark. So today we're going to be doing all kinds of exploring and experimenting with paint in different ways, and this is really important for artists who are interested in paint and painting, because it's really important to understand the materials that you're working with and the potential of different materials maybe you hadn't thought about working with. So I like to break down the experimenting that I do into three different kind of ways of thinking about it, slightly scientifically. So the first thing I like to think about is the surface that I'm going to be painting on. So it doesn't just have to be canvas or paint or paper. We can play around with lots of different surfaces for applying paint to. And then the second thing I like to think about is the tools that I'm going to use to put the paint onto the surface and what those tools can offer, what kinds of marks they can make that maybe a paintbrush can't make. And then the third thing I like to think about is the paint itself. What can I use to make paint? What is around that's already that will offer me color, or what's in around that I can use that will change the kind of consistency or qualities of the paint that I want to use. So we're going to start today by looking at some surfaces. So I have a kind of a whole pile of different possibilities here in front of me to show you. Okay, so the first thing I have is a plate. Plates are great for painting onto and for printing off as well. Equally, in the same way, a piece of glass, but make sure that it's something with a nice polished edge so you're not going to hurt yourself as you're moving it around the place. If you don't have glass, a piece of Perspex will work really well, or a baking sheet from the kitchen will work the same as a piece of glass might. Equally, a piece of tin foil wrapped around some cardboard will work in the same way. Great for painting on and for printing off as well. Coloured paper, lots of different types of coloured paper. You might find it in, an art shop, or you might find it in sort of extra packaging that's around the place. Tissue paper, lots of different colours. Tissue paper is lovely because it gives you a very light kind of paper, and it gives you a nice kind of transparency for working with as well, and for pressing down onto your paint too. Baking paper, so that's beautiful for working with as well, either for working directly onto or for printing with or tearing. Get lots of lovely experimental work with greaseproof paper in the kitchen, nice and cheap. Black paper, so I've got here black tissue paper. I've also got black cartridge paper for working on as well. Then I have some sort of less permanent kind of materials. So something like leaves, cabbage leaves are brilliant as well if you have them in your kitchen. Take the paint beautifully, and they're really nice to paint on because they kind of make you slow down and take notice of the patterns that are there on the leaf. Some of the tools that we might use for painting and experimental painting. So I have, of course, a household brush, nice thick bristles, but it's important to keep it nice and clean so that it moves really nicely for you. Then I have a peg with a piece of tin foil on it. Of course, you can put all kinds of things inside your peg to make a paintbrush from. You could put little pieces of wool or pieces of cotton into the pegs, a really handy holder. I have a piece of hessian, which will give me, as you can see the edge there, it'll give me a nice paint surface, kind of scrapey. I've made some paintbrush with some reeds, so just tape them together at the end like that, and then you'll get a nice brush for working with that. I have a comb, I have a lollipop stick, piece of card already cut into a shape that I want it to be. So that will give me lots of options there as well. If I only have cardboard for experimenting with, I can just cut it into lots of different shapes and I'll get loads of different tools from that. Then I have a candle, always really handy for experimental painting with. I'll show you how that works in a few minutes. And then I have a stick that I've cut into a nice kind of drawing tool. So that's just some of the drawing tools that I have. There's endless options for exploring and making tools for drawing or painting with. So I'm next going to show you some paint. So you can make your own pigments by grating chalks into a sieve. Just grating the chalks into the sieve like that, and you'll get a lovely pigment. You can work so that you can put it into a container and keep all your different colours separate, or you can mix your own colours, or you can work directly onto the painting that you use. So that's an interesting way of making some powder paint. What else might there be around the place that we could use as paint apart from chalk? So, or what else could we add the chalk into? So I have gathered up some things from around my house that I thought would make interesting things to add the pigment into, or that might also already have pigment in them that I could use as paint in themselves. So I have things like vegetable oil or lemon juice I could add into those powdered paints or powdered chalk. So those will give me different types of paint. I could also use something like hand sanitizer. That will give me a kind of an interesting ink. I could use something like turmeric. So if I don't have chalks, I could use, that will work like a powder paint because it's a really, really strong colour. I can use something like cordial, like blackcurrant cordial. That will give me a colour. Or soy sauce, or different kinds of vinegars. Those will give me a nice colour as well. Or I can use something like this guy here, cut up a beetroot and land that in something just of itself. It'll give you its colour, a colour of its own. Yeah. So lots of things. Then to make kind of paint from different things, this one is really interesting. This is pieces of copper in a jar with some salt and some vinegar. And what the salt and vinegar do to the copper is they kind of start to oxidize or patinate the copper. And they create then, after a few weeks, they create a paint that's green like this. So perfectly safe to use because it's just salt and vinegar. It smells a bit like chips, but really nice paint to use as well and to experiment with. So let's have a go at some. We also have some clay. So this is just mud from outside with a little bit of water added, and this is some wool in a peg that I'm going to use as a paintbrush. That's another option. I could also use things like coffee or tea. So let's start some experimenting with the paint. I think we shall start by showing you what the copper oxide paint might do. Get a nice brush, and then I'm going to show you this copper oxide paint here, which will stir it around a little bit. Gives a beautiful green colour. Really, really nice. And the amazing thing about this is there's little pieces of metal in it, because the metal, of course, doesn't completely disintegrate, it just changes. So that's the copper oxide one. I'm going to have a look and see what that does on black paper. See, does it change at all? Oh, it's lovely on black paper as well, isn't it? Really, really nice. Doing something quite different to the black paper because I'm gathering up all the chalky bits at the end. This also, interestingly, really takes quite a long time to dry. I'm not entirely sure why. But, Let's try now next. Let's try some vinegar or some turmeric with hand sanitizer. So I'm just going to take the pestle and mortar, take a little piece of turmeric from my turmeric jar. Then I'm going to add in, I think, just a little bit of hand sanitizer this time. See how that works. Nice. Okay, so I'm going to use another kind of a brush. This is sort of a rubber-ended brush. I'm going to pop that down on top of this one. Oh, it's nice and gritty. Might need a little bit more liquid. So then we could try adding a little bit of, maybe adding a little bit of soy sauce on there. Get a nice sort of black mark going on. And then I think what I'd like to do is to use my sort of scrapey tool and scrape that across the paint. It's going to give me a really lovely thick mark. Beautiful. And I can next experiment with some beetroot. I'm going to try a little bit of lemon juice onto the end of the beetroot, just to see does that help with the colour distribution. It's already coming out, lovely colour already. See that sort of rose sort of stain on it. You can also make a beautiful paint with cabbage water. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching and thinking about exploring paint and different processes for experimenting with paint. And I hope you enjoy your own experiments. And please do send in any pictures or ideas or discoveries that you make. Send them in to us. We'd love to see them. Thanks again. Bye.